This is the European edition of Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show. We bring you the European unicorns, startups, founders, regulators, and leaders innovating the rapidly evolving fintech scene today. A truly localized podcast with both English and local language content, with some of the world's most well-known hosts and influencers in the fintech sector globally. Join us every week as we explore what makes the European Union a phenomenal proving ground for many of the fastest growing fintech plays in the world today. Okay, let's roll.
Hey guys, welcome back to Breaking Banks Europe. Episode 208 series is Breaking Carbon. I am Matteo Rizzi, the executive producer of the show. Happy 2024. I think it's like we're going to mention it a couple of times in these first episodes. I am here with Dr.Schmidt from Stockholm of Normative. Alex, welcome to Breaking Banks Europe.
Thank you so much for the invite. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Alex and I had a pretty cool interview back at the Nordic FinTech weeks, like a couple of months ago. It seems like 3 lifetimes ago, but it wasn't, that far away. And I thought it would be good, back then we only had a couple of minutes, but I thought that both for the personality and the insights of Alex, as well as to shed some more lights into the whole carbon accounting topic, I thought it was worth it to give him a full episode. So Alex, why don't you start by tell us a little bit about yourself and about what Normative does?
Happy to, yeah. No, you're right. The Nordic FinTech week has been in September, I believe, but it feels like so much happened. I think some of which we'll get into hopefully with the course of this little chat here. But first things first, I'm Alex. I'm heading Normative Science, Sustainability, and Climate Research Department. Normative is a carbon accounting engine. So it means at the core what we do is we provide companies, we help them to accurately account for, assess all of the greenhouse gas emissions. I often refer to them just as carbons or carbon emissions through a software solution, fully automated, to make sure they get the full overview of their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. They get all the insights and activities they need to do to engage their supply chains. And then ultimately, of course, reducing their emissions towards the global goal of net zero emissions. Now, with my role, science, sustainability, climate research, that is really, you can say, focused on owning our scientific integrity. And as we know, and as we might get into in the course of this conversation here, science and the integrity of these carbon reductions and what's happening globally on the planetary scale is so important. It's so important to be accurate, to follow regulations, but also, of course, to really make a difference in the reduction race to a low carbon economy, of course, especially in finance.
And we'll touch the finance whole ecosystem in a little while, but this whole introduction, is that one of the reasons why there is now the word accounting, beside the carbon, because like the two words immediately sounded, that was actually one of the things that when we first met, I think it was the first question I asked you, why this association? Because it is not intuitive, put it this way.
Well, I can't speak for where this term actually originated from, who was the first one to claim ownership of this carbon accounting. I do like the analogy to financial accounting, because ultimately we should apply the same level of scrutiny that we apply to financial accounting, to bookkeeping, also to our carbon accounting. If you just think quickly about where does accounting come from? I mean, ultimately, what we want to account for is not just like some abstract numbers, some like bottom line figures. Ultimately, if we're honest about where this all leads to, what monetary value brings us, can buy us, is well-being, right? Like ultimately, it's about accounting for well-being. How well is our company doing? Meaning, what is my own income, my personal well-being, etc. So we see, or we hopefully see, more and more of a shift towards realizing that it's not just about financial bookkeeping and numbers, but it's about well-being on a more global scale. And there, the carbon aspect is so important. So doing the carbon accounting with the same level of scrutiny that we account for other financial figures, I think this will bring us much closer to the original goal of accounting for well-being.
So we don't, let's not forget the fact that not every one of our, couple of million auditors are experts in the field, right? So let's go a couple of steps back, Alex, and pitch a little bit the lay of the land. Okay, so we are in the a sustainability, ESG goals. The green economy, there are the carbon footprint is something that concerns, every person on the planet. It of course concerns companies even more, simply because of the scale of the problem, right? So and of course, this can only be solved by software, right? Because there is no way we can, keep trace, of all the footprint that, especially very large companies, are living on this planet, and there is no way to make it compensate. So, talk to us a little bit about when did we start? How did we start this whole software movement, of different companies that are trying to solve this problem? What are the different approaches? And then we'll go into the financial services space and see what is the impact, because at the end of the day, this is a FinTech podcast.
Yeah. Okay. Happy to, and please jump in any time when I get a bit too into nitty-gritty maybe. But starting really from the foundational, because you asked the question, where does it all come from? I would say one of the major milestones here was 2015, the Paris Agreement, where actually nations all committed to, yes, we need to urgently reduce emissions from fossil fuels industry in line with science, because what we see is we're heading towards more and more, global warming is increasing at a rapid pace. And if we don't keep track of this and control this and at least slow down the pace and then limit any kind of warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. That is the milestone that they set. If we fail to do so, we will breach these so-called planetary boundaries, beyond which we don't know what happens, to be honest. We don't know what happens when all of the ice caps have been melted, because it might be irreversible. It might be that sea level rises are irreversible, or it takes hundreds of years for the system to adjust again. And this is not just about we care about beautiful places, nature, and stuff. No, it's also real economic impacts there. So coming back to financial accounting, bookkeeping, you can forget about your books if the whole economic system doesn't work anymore, because supply chains don't work anymore. You don't have any more pathways to actually ship goods and services. People there are a lot more climate refugees around the world. This will all threaten our very basis of living, pretty much globally, economically, in all kinds of regards. So that's where we started from. 2015, latest, the realization and the commitment from country leaders to reduce emissions. Now, countries, they don't really produce emissions, right? Countries themselves, not like factories. They might be owning some of the factories, but ultimately it's companies in the jurisdictions of countries. Companies, private individuals, they contribute to the greenhouse gas emissions. So they make up the whole of greenhouse gas emissions in a country. So if country leaders commit to reducing emissions, ultimately it means the private sector has to reduce emissions. So, and there, of course, emerges the need to actually account for emissions. Now, just to throw out one name, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, that is the gold standard of how to account for your emissions. So that has been set up in this whole context of.
And this is global. I mean, it's been decided in Paris, and everyone is a standard, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So Paris commitment is an outcome of the UN climate conference, the annual conference, COP. You might have heard it. It was just happening in December. Actually, we were there as a company that was part of this end sprint of 2023, where nations come together, negotiate about what's the new commitments we need to uphold to keep our eye on the 1.5 degrees Celsius target. And in that context, greenhouse gas protocol has been developed actually already earlier than that. The need was realized before. It's just the country commitment that came later. But now greenhouse gas protocol is pretty much the acknowledged standard, though imperfect, but how to do accounting on that level. So companies follow the greenhouse gas protocol to account for their own emissions and also emissions across the entire value chains, realizing, you said it before, that especially large companies, they can't just look at what do we do in our offices or maybe our storage facilities. They need to look at what do I enable or what do I actually encourage in terms of emissions by demanding products, by producing somewhere else around the world. What am I actually responsible for, accountable for in terms of global emissions?
How accurate, Alex, can you be, in sort of listing and taking counts of the carbon emissions? I mean, and again, I'm trying to speak a language and even like give some images for people and myself as well to understand, because I'm not an expert. I'm here to make you say smart things. So if I'm a company, is that like the planes that I take? How much people are commuting that are commuting from place A to B, or is just like big numbers? Because at the end of the day, it is a collection of micro consumptions, right? That gives the big numbers, right? How powerful are these softwares to make this number, counts at the end?
Yeah. This is such a good point, and you're entirely right. There are different degrees of accuracy that we see there, not just between different softwares, but also just in terms of what is feasible right now. Ultimately, of course, greenhouse gases can be measured, can be actually measured, in the atmosphere or at the tailpipe, for example. So, of course, ideally, we have meters installed everywhere at every physical outlet. So we would actually ideally measure the physical unit, the gases, right where they are being produced. Again, as said, like tailpipes, can be trucks, can be ships, vessels, can be the chimneys of factories. That's, of course, the ideal scenario. Let's be honest here, we don't have that data. So we need to get to some certain proxy. And what the greenhouse gas protocol does is it divides emissions into 3 different scopes. So scope 1 is really direct emissions from your operations, which is pretty much fuel consumption. There you can be quite accurate. Even though you might not have a meter installed in your lease cars, trucks, whatever you operate, for example, how much liters of fuel have you been purchasing at the gas station. So that is quite an accurate metric, because we know if you burn 100 liters of diesel, that leads to X amount of emissions. So that is very accurate, I would say. Scope 2 emissions are mostly, you can say, your electricity. What do you need to power your facilities? It's a bit less accurate because you have the gray energy mix usually in the market. You don't know exactly like this electron here came from that power plant, unfortunately. But you can still be fairly accurate as to, okay, I purchase 50% renewable energies from solar, and then 50% I purchase, traditional fossil-based energy. So you can still have a fairly accurate estimate of your contribution through electricity consumption. But now comes your point probably, or where you want to get to, scope 3 emissions. Those are the value chain emissions. Those are emissions where really we have to rely mostly on estimates, because most softwares are right now not at the point where they screen each and every supplier, or each and every supplier is not at the point where they themselves measure emissions very accurately. Just as an example, normative, we do supplier engagement. So that is already the first step you need to do. We do ask suppliers to input their figures, their scope 1 and scope 2 metrics, for example. But in scope 3, it is important to make sure we also comprehensively cover everything. And we can't rely on every supplier being as mature as we want them to be. So we need to have fallback options with industry average data to just know, okay, this is a supplier of a certain region, of a certain industry. On average, when you purchase, let's say, a new phone, these are the emissions inherently, in the production of that phone. So you need to have industry average data to fall back on. If you cannot engage with a supplier to a degree, that would give you very accurate figures.
So where is normative in the landscape of the softwares? I mean, it's like to use another image, is like for normal accounting you have a zero, and then you have the Sage, and you have like other accounting softwares, or you guys have like a unique value proposition, if nothing else, because it's pretty early stage, right, in the space. So there are not many that are focusing on this.
That is true. Yeah. I mean, normative, we've been actually around, I would say we're among at least the oldest players in the market. So we've been founded actually in 2014. So that was pretty much coincidental with the Paris Agreement. To be honest, at the time, the appetite for carbon accounting was quite low. So at that time, no one has really felt the pressure and the need. Now, I think one of the key drivers is regulation, is competition, but more and more we also see opportunities there playing a bigger role. So companies realizing, hey, I can be a leader in this space, so I can actually reap benefits of it. So normative, we've really built up very carefully our whole engine, our whole database, because it's so important. We have a deep knowledge with our experts from science, from academia, but also from industries, because you need to understand both parts. I, of course, often play the kind of the connective tissue between academia, the research, like what is right now happening there, and the application. And then, of course, we have the big focus on accuracy in Scope 3 carbon accounting, so in your value chain accounting. That is the piece latest where your own spreadsheets will break down. You might have spreadsheets that work well to keep track of fuel consumption, electricity, maybe that still works, but really the supplier engagement, the supplier data collection, making sense of it, making sure you spend your time where it's actually most valuable. I often have this example of you don't run around recycling office paper, but actually you look at where is my hotspot in emissions, and you might be surprised where it actually sits, and you might be surprised by how easy it is to take actions to at least make some first progress in Scope 3 reductions. So value chain engagement, pretty much making the invisible visible, making the carbon in your value chain visible, and with high degree of scientific accuracy and regulatory compliance, of course. I think those are the core pillars that normative software is resting on.
So intuitively, I would say that it is much easier to understand the huge carbon footprint of Maersk, right, for the big shipping companies, right? And maybe a little bit less in financial institutions and insurances and asset managers. And you sent me yesterday a super interesting study that I only read diagonally, but I'm pretty sure that you dominate it. So what is the role of financial services in this scene?
Yeah, it's, I would say, twofold. So you have this whole ongoing net zero transition, so transition to a low carbon economy. And finance plays a major role here, because ultimately we have a $90 trillion finance gap that we have to bridge to enable all the technologies, all the shifts that need to happen in the economy to move towards this low carbon state. But
why this number 90 trillion? Where does it come from?
It's a report. It's an investigation. I think it's been in 2022. I can send you the link for your show notes, maybe, if you have them later on. But it was pretty much illustrating the financing that needs to happen over the course of the next decades to actually ensure that we get on track towards a net zero economy. So importantly here is, of course, the number itself is huge, but also then it's not just about throwing money at the problem. you need to know where to throw the money at, right? It's a problem, but it's also a very opaque problem. So in order to know where the money should be going, financial institutions, financial services providers, they need to know which are actually the low carbon solutions that they shouldn't be investing in, so that you don't invest in any kind of company, but you invest in companies, you have a portfolio that is in line with a low carbon future, with a low carbon economy. So realizing we have a finance gap for the big task at hand to transition, and then realizing that that finance needs to have clarity, transparency on where the money should be going. But then the other hand is also, the other side of it is also, it's inevitable for finance to transition in a net zero economy. Otherwise, they will be left out. They will have portfolios misaligned with the future, with what regulations will demand of them. So there's a push and pull here for finance to be active and be a major player in the transition.
While you were talking, hearing the passion that you're putting in your words, I wonder whether or not there is some sort of a new breed of entrepreneurs, that are working in this economy. And it is true that the only way to make huge companies, especially financial institutions, move is through regulation. So you have to oblige them to comply, otherwise it won't happen. But more on the startup technology and innovation side, I wonder, at the end of the day, it's always a money game, right? So it has to be a business that is sustainable, et cetera, But when you talk with your peers, especially with entrepreneurs and startups, do you see also a sort of a different philosophy in doing business? You see what I mean? So I'm trying to figure out if there is almost a new breed, a new way of doing business that in the same way that impact entrepreneurs, they care about the business, but they also care about financial inclusion, in Africa, for example. So do you feel this, when you talk with your peers and with their companies, or is still the same old, let's just maximize the profit, just do it in a green way?
To be honest, I see both. I see the traditional way is dominating in many organizations. I think understandably so. They are built, have been building up in a different kind of environment. And it's been pretty much profit motive. Friedman's whole comment around, or premise around companies' purpose is to maximize shareholder value. I mean, that is ultimately the game. But I do see that they realize, and will have to realize ultimately, that it is in their own long-term interest, as I just sketched out a bit with finance, to align their own way of doing business with what is actually needed for a healthy transition to low carbon. As I tried to paint a bit the picture earlier, we will not have traditional working supply chains. We will have such a global crisis if we do not work to stop and to limit the damage done by global warming. So I think they have to realize is maybe short-term business as usual. Yeah, that will probably be honestly the highest profit margin for them. But medium to latest long-term, and long-term I mean 10, 15, 20 years down the road. So within definitely, hopefully our lifetimes here, this will be the only viable solution. You can't close yourself off of the transition there. And what brings me, or brought me to the whole space is there's this idea of profit for good. I do not believe that just philanthropy will solve it all. Donor, money is always much needed and much appreciated. It is also not the most efficient way of doing things. I do believe that a working business model around charitable cause, or like a positive impact, that is the way to go. And I mean, for us at Normative, for example, The way that we look at it is every customer that onboards with us, of course, they have a subscription that they take out with us. Of course, it's revenue stream, but it's also carbon calculated. So something invisible made visible. That's the first step on the journey to actually reduce the carbon. So yes, our revenue then goes up, of course, but also our impact goes up. The potential to reduce emissions globally goes up. And I think that's just highly motivating for not just all of my colleagues here, but also must be the mindset that the companies take on for the future. How can we align our business model with a thriving planet? Because if you only prioritize one or the other, it's not feasible, it's not really sustainable.
I think that, and I would like you to develop it a little bit. You mentioned the longer term, vision that is important, because we are in the struggle here is that you have an industry that think quarters, and but this space is to literally save our planet for the next hundreds of years, right? I have teenagers, kids, and I'm still, decently confident that for them, it will still be, the kind of the same inertia that you are living. But for their kids, the world is going to be changed, is going to change dramatically, right? So how do you register, or how do you see this dichotomy, of thinking in quarters versus thinking in decades, and how much education and what needs to happen? Regulation is one thing, but how do you see this very rooted mindset to be able to change?
I think it's one of the biggest challenges that we have right now. I find it very encouraging that we get more and more actually behavioral scientists involved in this space, because ultimately it's about also behavior change. You mentioned quarterly cycles, for businesses to plan. We have next level would be election cycles. Politicians, of course, they look at the next election cycle. That's maybe 4 years for them. That's not long term enough to actually move things globally. We see inconsistencies in policies, right? Like things being taken back, countries withdraw from agreements, for example, just because the administration has changed. And to draw on a parallel here with the COVID, for example, I mean, COVID was for me one of the examples of it is quite imminent, like the effect of, for example, exposing yourself in public, as when we didn't know what this whole thing is about. And yet it was so difficult for people to wrap their heads around, I cannot go to this party. I cannot gather, in this crowd. While the effects were so, immediate, but only when really people saw what's happening around them. Oh, actually, this colleague, neighbor, friend of mine has been affected. Only then they started to change the behavior. So now what we ask of them, of everyone, public companies, leaders, is to not look at, what's happening next week after a contact with a deadly virus, potentially the deadly virus. We ask them to look at, what's happening 25, 30, 40 years from now. And of course, that's a huge mental gap you have to bridge there. But it's sad, but I do believe that recent events have been starting to leave more of an imprint there. We see 2023 has been the hottest year on record once more. And we see people really suffering. Maybe it's just on their vacation when they go to a nice tropic island and realize this is not pleasant anymore. This is not a place to be in summer. And then suddenly we realize supply chain disruptions because of droughts, for example, and ships cannot go through canals anymore. And then we notice our Amazon delivery is not on time. Well, there are small impacts now, but these will accumulate. And the more we can trace this back to the root cause of climate change, of global warming, the more we realize, wait a second, actually, this is more pressing than I thought. It is still a big gap to bridge, no question about it. But that's why I also believe it is not just about like individuals doing their parts. It's about businesses realizing we have a leadership role to play here. that is also pushed by regulation, but there's a huge opportunity. Like, once more, there's so much, to be just honest, money in the market that you can make by having sustainable products. We work, for example, with Nordea, to come back to fintech. Nordea is placing sustainability-linked products like loans to their business banking customers' own carbon footprint. So there's a smart way of saying, hey, we want to know your footprint, but you calculating it also means you have advantages here. You get preferred access to products. And of course, it's a new revenue stream also for the bank. So there's a true win-win. Companies just have to realize it, that there's this opportunity in the market.
One thing that it's comforting me and gives some light, to this whole matter is, as I mentioned, one of my children goes to university, and he goes to like a Sciences Po in France, and Sciences Po is the school that is preparing the politicians of tomorrow. It's a little bit, it sounds like elitistic a little bit, but statistically speaking, most of the rulers of the countries came from that specific university. And I read the program, and it says that every single week there is either an expert or a talk or a debate or an exercise or a research-based fact, like exposition on sustainability. I think it starts from schools, and I wonder whether or not this is just out of my own curiosity, if you guys go and talk to like the students, and the young people, because let's not forget that these guys are the rulers of tomorrow, and it's incredible because I start, they were going now to Italy, for a week break, and 90% of them didn't want to catch a plane to go there, so they prefer to like go 20 hours on the bus, rather than on a train, kind of the same, instead of taking a plane. That is something that was completely unthinkable only a decade ago, especially because plane was cheaper. So plane, in this case, it was cheaper and faster. So, I don't know if you have experience of how young people are also changing their mentality.
I mean, one of my big hopes, definitely. I work a lot with students, actually. So in my role, I come from academia. I still work a lot with academia together, building up more and more partnerships also in this space, and internship programs for students, because I do see a huge interest in students, not just from sustainability-linked studies, but also like I have interns from finance, I have interns from general economics, actually also more creative studies, arts, that actually do want to get a glimpse into what it is like to work for a climate tech scale up, such as normative. There's a huge interest in there. There's a huge conscious about, well, obviously among our colleagues a lot more than maybe the average Swedish company, but still there's a lot of conscientiousness about what can I as an individual do through my own behavior, but also through my work and where I want to work for. And there are also figures and statistics about how actually employees look for a company with a sustainability record that is positive, that is in line with their own values. So you as a company, as an employer, can make yourself way more attractive, or you will be way more attractive to talent if you have at least a good sustainability policy, or of course, if you actively work in this space. So we see a lot of, I find, encouraging movement there from young people. We just now need to get them, of course, into the roles, as you say, politicians, etc., to actually be at the point where they make decisions, where they shape global agendas.
Alex, our time is up. Thank you so much for shedding some lights into this fascinating not so new world anymore, but certainly super important for our future. I suppose that normative.io is the website where people can know more, if I remember correctly, right?
That is correct.
So thanks once again, Alex, and I hope we will have more talks like this in the future. Thank you so much for being with us.
I would love to come back, and thank you so much for the invitation. We enjoyed it.
And it's a wrap.
Thanks for listening to Breaking Banks Europe, a Provoke Media podcast in cooperation with FinTech Stage. Don't forget to tweet us out, shout out, or post to the team at Breaking Banks EU on Twitter. If there's something or someone you'd like to hear on our cast, let us know. See you next week on Breaking Banks Europe.